Shalom and welcome to Biblical Faith with Sam Peak. We invite you to join us as Sam brings a study in the Torah from the Jewish sages. And now our speaker, Sam Peak.
So Shalom Aleichem. I hope everyone is okay. We have we're in Pirkei Avot, chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot, Mishnah number 8. And this is still Hillel the Great who is speaking. I almost don't want to do this Mishnah, this particular one, because I'm afraid some people will get offended by some of the things that Hillel actually says. But let's be very careful with it and put everything into context, okay? And I think it will be okay, all right? All right, so let's not draw any wild conclusions before we actually talk about the Mishnah, all right? Okay. So, Hillel, he used to say, the more flesh, the more worms. The more possessions, the more worry. The more wives, the more witchcraft. The more maidservants, the more lewdness. The more men servants, the more thievery. Now he goes to the second part of this Mishnah. However, the more Torah, the more life. The more study, the more wisdom. The more counsel, the more understanding. The more charity, the more peace. Okay? And then he finishes with one who has gained a good name, literally. Okay? Shem Tov. They translated here a good reputation because that's what it means. Has gained it for his own benefit. One who has gained himself knowledge in the Torah has gained himself the life of the world to come. Okay? And I believe, that's the end of it. Okay. All right, let's back up and let's look at what is actually being said here. And again, we're using a book, the Maharal of Prague on Pirkei Avot, which is a commentary that has been put together by Rabbi Tuvia Basser, based on selections. He took certain selections from the Maharal's Derek Chaim, all right? The Maharal, Rabbi Judah of Prague, all right? Again, I'm not always, I don't want to say comfortable, that's not the word. I'm not always on the same page as the Maharal of Prague either, but let's see what he's saying. The very first part of this is absolutely beautiful, what he says, because he begins by saying there are two fundamental parts to a human being. One is this physical body, and the other is the spiritual aspect of us, which includes a number of things, all right? We'll get to that later, I think in the next Mishnah. The first part of this Mishnah, of Mishnah number 8 of chapter 2, discusses first 5 physical aspects of human life, while the second part, the latter part of the Mishnah, discusses 5 spiritual aspects of a human's life. And the Mishnah lists 10 areas of life in total, ranging from the most physical to the most spiritual. It starts and it gives them in order from the very most physical thing, meaning the body. He starts out the more flesh, the more worms. From the body, going to the most spiritual thing. Now he says the number 10 is the symbolic distance between earth and heaven. And of course, any of us who have studied anything in the Sod level of Torah study, the Kabbalah, know about the 10 Sfirot. And so he's actually making a veiled reference to the 10 Sfirot. But the example that he actually gives is he says it's the distance, 10 is the symbolic distance between earth and heaven, and it is the span between physical and spiritual, all right? And that, by the way, is actually based on a teaching in the Talmud in Tractate Sukkah 5a. For example, the example he gives us, he doesn't go into the 10 Sfirot. He gives us the example of the 10 Commandments. And he says the 10 Commandments span all of human life, and they are divided into 5 commandments that have a spiritual focus. Now, I would look at it this way. I don't think I would translate the Ram or the Maharal that way, because all of them have to do with both a spiritual and a physical connection. The first 5 have to do with a human being's relationship with Hashem. And the second 5, he says, that deal with the more physical side of life. But we're talking about the second 5 of the 10 Commandments deal with relationships between people. The first 5, relationship between you and Hashem. The second 5, relationship between you and other human beings. But to me, both of those things are very, very spiritual. I mean, and if it's one thing I've learned is that Hashem is one, and so is a human being. I mean, even though we can dissect certain things, and we're going to really dissect, the Maharal is a soul, all right? And he's going to tell us all kinds of things about a soul later on, and we'll see what that is. But still, it's all one. And there's a very wonderful rule in Kabbalah that says souls are made for bodies, and bodies are made for souls, okay? So, but I understand the point he's trying to make here. The point he's trying to make here is he's saying this is the way it is in anything of the spiritual world the spiritual world's connection to the physical world. There's 2 sides, okay? But those 2 sides are connected and they work together. And he says in our Mishnah, this Mishnah of Rabbi Hillel, it reflects the same structure. Now he begins by teaching us several important things that we need to get a hold of. And something that we have to always remember with the Maharal. The Maharal was actually a contemporary. He was in Prague in Czechoslovakia. The Arizal, who really gave us the entire structure of what we study in Kabbalistic studies today. He didn't rearrange everything. He really recovered extremely ancient knowledge. So a lot of times you'll hear certain Kabbalists, like my friend Reb Avraham Sutton, where our Rabbi Ginsburg, also Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, where he'll talk about the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, and he'll talk about the Kabbalists of the Middle Ages, and then he'll say the ancient Kabbalists. And the ancient Kabbalists, like in the time of Moshe, okay, of Moses, King David, the First Temple period, and even the Second Temple period, they knew the entire structure of the Kabbalah, which the Arizal gave us, all right, returned to us in a sense. But during the time of the Middle Ages, of which the Maharal had been a part, they used different terminology, and they used different terms for certain structures. Now, one of the things we're going to run into in this study is because the Maharal is going to take us into some real Kabbalistic concepts on some things, but he is not going to use the same language necessarily that we are familiar with, especially those of us who have studied for so long with the Baal HaSulam, Rabbi Yehuda Lev Ashlag, who gives us certain words, and the Maharal is going to give us different ones. And we have to remember that in the Maharal's system, in his Kabbalistic system, his way of thinking, he sees, and he's absolutely correct in this, it's just today we use a little bit different terms. He's talking about Homer, the raw material, you remember, the raw material, and then a form, substance, and then form that comes and forms that substance, okay? And this is very much the idea also of a body and soul. A body is raw material, and the soul literally shapes that. Where we get in a bind is if the body is shaping the soul, okay? And then we're upside down, absolutely upside down. Okay, anyway, we'll get into that more and more. But what he is going to point out some things that are very, very important. I just don't want this to be confusing to anyone that studied with us for so long, things from Rabbi Ashlag, and then we're using different terminology in here. So I'll try to make the connection all the time so that we can stay on track with the Maharal, because he has wonderful things to tell us. And he was an excellent Kabbalist. Physical things, he says, are limited in space and in time. Well, of course they are. Since they are of limited duration, they don't last forever, at least not in the world that we are in right now. They must deteriorate. This is the lesson, he says, of the first 5 items in this Mishnah. Excess, and every one of them is excess, more, the more flesh, okay? Meaning, he'll tell us what that means in a second. But excess in physical matters actually sets the forces of deterioration in motion. Those forces are already in motion, no matter what. But excess, the more you're connected to the physical, the more you're actually going into excess with all of these physical things, then it sets the forces of deterioration in motion even faster. It goes quicker, yes?
It's not only applied to an individual case, but how about mankind as a whole?
Oh, of course, yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Of course, mankind as a whole, absolutely. Now, on the other side of the coin, he says spiritual activities, they are not limited by space, neither are they limited by time. Rather, they are part of eternity. And he's going along the eternal aspect of a soul, all right? He says, and this is the lesson of the last 5 items in this Mishnah. The more that one engages in spiritual activities, the more they elevate a person, meaning the closer that person comes to Hashem, is the idea. The physical elements, he says, of life. Listen to what he says now, though. Again, we see how everything becomes one and how everything in the spiritual realm has to manifest itself in the physical world. The physical elements of life are the foundation for all spiritual growth. Yeah.
Say that again.
The physical elements of life, in other words, to eat, to drink, to sleep, to take care of your body, to have whatever possessions you need to have in order to be in life here, those are the foundation for all spiritual growth. For instance, do you know if you get extremely ill, you actually move into a status of tameh, of uncleanness. Why? You say, how can that be? And it has to do with because of the deterioration of your body affects your intellect, affects your focus, affects everything, and you become, if your body is sick, you become much more focused on yourself. Right. You can't, and it corks you. That's what tameh actually means. We shouldn't say unclean in a sense. We should say corked. It puts a cork in the bottle. It plugs you up. Exactly right. Exactly right. Anyway, read it one more time. The physical elements of life are the foundation for all spiritual growth. A healthy body, okay, eternal possessions, or essential possessions, one spouse, and assistance with work in the home and in the field. This is the practical basis for spiritual success. The Mishnah warns us that excess in any of these areas defeats that. Is self-defeating. Because that's what Hillel is trying to tell us. The more you're concerned, the more you're taking on over your body, other than the essential things that need to be done, then the more worms. That's what he's going to say next. Let's look at it. The more flesh, the more worms. The reference, he says, to flesh and to worms, they are only illustrations of a basic principle. Flesh, basar, represents any aspect of bodily indulgence. Actually, it's a word that's even used for the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, which comes from the body. Or the will or the desire to receive for yourself alone also is this idea, okay? So it represents any aspect of bodily indulgence, and worms is a symbol of physical deterioration. just as worms consume the flesh until it is no more in the grave. This image, he says, conveys the principle that we can say bodily excess, or we can say always following your Yetzer Hara, or we can say always being egoistic, always being only doing everything for the will for your desire and your will to receive for yourself alone, being self-centered. All of those things is a direct cause of bodily deterioration. And he says, we only think of that principle as applying in death. He says, but what Hillel is telling us is that principle applies in life as well as in death. That's extremely interesting what he is saying. Okay, the next one. The more possessions, the more worry. Possessions, the Maharal says, are a physical aspect of life, although they are not part of the body itself. The principle that physical excess directly causes negative consequences also applies to your assets, to your possessions as well. An increase of possessions always brings with it an increase in the anxiety of losing them, what you will do without them. How did you live before you had a dishwasher? Yeah. Yeah. How did you live before you had an automatic garage door opener? Yeah. I'm just thinking of certain things. What he is actually telling us, though, is the more you're centered on what you have, okay, all of those things, that brings with it a total increase in the anxiety of losing them. That leads to what is called in modern times stress, which leads to bodily deterioration. And Hillel the Great knew this a long time ago. We'll go on a little farther. Oh, oy vey. The more wives, the more witchcraft. Now, he's not talking about marrying one and divorcing her and marrying another, and divorcing that one and marrying another. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about having many at one time. All right? Now, understand, this is not, by the way, you know that even though the Torah allows this,
The Torah allows what?
the Torah does permit you to have more than one wife. The rabbis of today, except for the Sephardim still allow, I think, two. Very, very few Sephardim actually do that because they know in advance it's a big problem. Okay? But the rabbis have forbidden a person more than one wife for many years, and it's based on this thing here. Now, have you ever noticed, I don't know what the real reason is why the Torah doesn't say women can have more than one husband, but obviously the way men are built, that's not going to happen, all right? Because men are totally much more self-centered in an outward way most of the time than women are. So the Torah does permit, okay, at certain times if everything's, and I think it depends upon the spiritual level of people, all right? But we already know that even though women aren't so self-centered that they're so outwardly self-centered that they would shoot you, okay, they are still, from their own desire to receive for themselves alone, from that own desire, there's still going to be problems. And I can just picture in your mind, just put yourself in the situation. Look at the case of Hannah, the mother of Samuel, the mother of Shmuel, and the torment that she went through from the other wife. Look even at the two sisters who are best friends. And the competition and the jealousy and the rivalry that was between them. And this is what Hillel the Great is talking about. Even when he says witchcraft, what does that mean? It actually, it's the word keshafim, which means magic, okay? But it's always a direct a direct reference to, as far as I can tell, especially in ancient writings. It's not that they were being witches. That's not what he's talking about. It means that stuff is coming out of their mouth. Because this is what witchcraft is. Incantations that are said, certain words, certain letters in a certain order that actually cause harm, okay? Of course, without any doubt against the other wife. That's the idea. That's the idea. So we'll read the Maharal's comments. He says, a man needs a wife to establish the home and the household. This is a physical need, in other words, okay? Although the Torah permits several wives, it is still an excess which eventually brings about problems. Now look at King David. Look at King Solomon. Historically, it was primarily women, he says, who practiced witchcraft. Now see, only the Maharal can say this, but this is 500 years ago that he's saying this. I wouldn't dare say what he's saying now. That's why I explained it in a much nicer way. He says, because they excel in the prerequisite qualities of imagination and worldliness. But I still don't think the Maharal is meaning, because the Maharal, like all the great rabbis, said that women are automatically on a higher spiritual level than men. It's just because the soul of women is rooted in binah, the side of understanding, the left side, okay? Because of that, they're much more severe. And I think that's the real problem. Okay. He says it's important to notice, though, that the warning of this Mishnah is actually directed at the husband. It's not directed at the wives. Even if his wives are religious women who would never practice witchcraft, a man who takes many wives is overtly attracted to qualities that have the potential for mischief. But I personally like my explanation better. Only in the sense that not that I'm trying to make it palpable to you, or not palpable, but compatible to you, that you'll accept it. But it makes more sense to me. I think Hillel the Great is talking basically about the sin of Lashon Hara, which, if we just realized it, this is what witchcraft is. Evil speech. Yeah. I had a question. I was teaching on Noahide Nations last night. I finished last night a series that I've been in for several years on changing the way you think. And a question was asked about theoretical Kabbalah and practical Kabbalah. And of course, theoretical Kabbalah is really the study of how the universe operates, a lot of what we do together sometimes, of how the universe operates and where we are at in it and where we come from and where we're going and what our responsibilities are and all those things. And then practical Kabbalah is generally defined, and this is why so many people make the terrible mistake of thinking that the Kabbalah, they also call the Kabbalah witchcraft. Because practical Kabbalah is based on simply saying certain names of Hashem or certain words together in a certain order, can have a profound impact upon the spiritual world that makes something manifest in a different way in the physical world. Well, this also is what witchcraft is doing, but it's doing it for its own self, okay? It's doing it self-serving. Okay, now hold on. But then I thought about it while I was teaching it, and I said, but I said, each and every person on the planet is actually practicing practical Kabbalah at all times. Because if it means stuff that we are saying and doing has an effect, everything that we are thinking, everything that we are saying, everything that we are doing has an effect on the physical worlds. It either repairs or it breaks. And then that's reflected back down in the physical world. So we're all practicing practical Kabbalah all the time at a certain level. And this is what I think Hillel is talking about. The jealousy that would be involved, and not even necessarily is he talking about sexual jealousy. He's talking about jealousy in the pecking order. Who's the first, who's number one, who's number two, who has to do this, who has to do that, who has to sweep the floor every time because she's Yeah, all of those things. He's trying to warn against that. Now, the next part it says, the more maidservants, the more lewdness. I put it in modern terms. The Maharal is going to make a reference about this, and men servants too, that the reason Hillel says this is because they are Canaanites and they tend towards those things. Let's be realistic. Men and women working together is not always such a good thing. It really isn't. And the two things that he says here are absolutely correct. And I don't know that we even have to go into much more detail than that. It's common sense for anybody who has ever worked in the workplace for any time. I mean, look, today, what do we have? We have, if you go and work for a corporation, if you're a man, the first thing you have to do is, spend at least 2 weeks in some kind of sexual harassment class where they make sure you don't make any comments that might be taken that way, okay? This is what he's talking about. The more maidservants, then the more lewdness, the more opportunity for bad situations to happen, even if you don't want. And the more men servants, the more thievery, he says. But again, he says the Mishnah implies actually criticism of the master, criticism of the boss, not the servants. And he makes it about the more thievery. He says sometimes they are driven to steal by the burdensome task their master sets for them if he's not a just person. Lot's shepherds, he says, for example, made their job easier by grazing his flocks on nearby private property rather than taking the time and effort to find an unowned pasture. So this was thievery, though. Now, we'll end with this next part because I don't want to end on these negative things. We've looked at the negative things of being overly involved in the physical world, all right? Without any spiritual contact. Totally involved in just what's in it for me right here, right now. And we see that all of these things lead to deterioration, lead to destruction, lead to problems. Now the Mishnah turns to the spiritual components of a human being, which improve as they are increased. And what's the first one? The more Torah, the more life. And the Maharal says the Torah vitalizes the soul. It's what your soul really lives on. And it is through Torah that one comes close to God, who is the very source of life. Absolutely. And we could talk about this for a very, very long time. We want to restart, the next time we're together, we want to restart right here and we'll focus on these positive things in more detail, okay? So none of the women are mad at the great Rabbi Hillel or me for the more wives, the more witchcraft thing. Okay, all right, Yofi Tofi. All right, so Toda Rabbah. It's just practical common sense is what he's talking about there. I think all of us, if we think about it, we know. Anyway, thank you very much. The next time we're together, we'll focus on the Torah, on these 5 very positive spiritual aspects of coming close to Hashem. Okay, all right, so Todah, I'll talk to you soon, and see you later. Shalom, shalom. Shalom uvakav. Peace and a blessing.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com, or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas 79604. Until next time, we wish you Shalom Uvakah, peace and a blessing.